There are moments that redefine your entire life, and for me, that moment arrived under the sterile glow of an emergency room light. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Arthur Hale, and I can recall the exact pattern of the acoustic ceiling tiles in that ER with more clarity than I can now picture my own son's face. They were a dull, institutional off-white, speckled with tiny brown imperfections, arranged in a perfect, unforgiving grid that felt like a cruel joke, mocking the utter chaos unfolding inside my chest. The pain had announced itself during my quiet evening tea, starting as a tight knot behind my sternum before spreading down my left arm like a river of molten lead. I was 64 years old, a man who had lived long enough and seen enough to know precisely what a heart attack felt like. Having been a cardiac nurse for 37 years before I finally retired, I instantly recognized the terrifying signals my own body was screaming at me. But all the clinical knowledge in the world doesn't dilute the raw, primal fear that grips you when you're the one on the gurney, watching your own life flicker on a monitor and hearing medical jargon volleyed around you like live ammunition. "Mr. Hale, we need to get in touch with someone for you," a young nurse said, her voice gentle but firm. Her name tag identified her as Sarah Jenkins, and her kind, empathetic eyes peered at me from behind simple, wire-rimmed glasses. "Is there any family we should be calling?" "My son," I managed to whisper, my voice a dry, reedy sound, nearly lost beneath the symphony of beeping machines. "Ethan, he's my only child." Sarah gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "What's his number, Arthur?" I recited Ethan's phone number from memory, the same string of digits I had committed to heart over 2 decades ago when he got his very first flip phone as a teenager. It was the same number I had dialed thousands of times since, just to check in, to offer a helping hand, or sometimes simply to hear the sound of his voice. It was also the same number that, in my moment of greatest vulnerability, was about to deliver the most devastating blow of my entire existence. I watched Sarah step a few feet away to make the call, and I held my breath, or at least as much as my struggling heart would permit. Through the thin, flimsy curtain that separated my babe from the hallway, I could make out disjointed pieces of her conversation. "Yes, this is Sarah Jenkins, a nurse at St. Jude's Medical Center. Your father, Arthur Hale, has been admitted. He's had a heart attack." "Yes, ma'am. It is serious. The doctor is saying the next few hours are absolutely critical." Then I overheard a phrase that sent a chill through my body colder than the IV fluids dripping into my veins. Sarah's voice grew more insistent, her tone shifting from informative to urgent. "Sir, I really need you to understand what I'm saying. Your father may not survive the night. The cardiologist is prepping for emergency surgery right now, but his condition is extremely unstable." And then I heard it. Even through the phone, even from across the room, I heard my son's response with enough chilling clarity to sear every single casual, unfeeling syllable into my memory, where they would haunt me for the remainder of my days. "I can't possibly come tonight. It's my father-in-law's big birthday party. I've been planning this celebration for months, and I can't miss it for anything in the world. Just tell my father I'll try to visit tomorrow if things work out." I saw the color drain from Sarah's face. She shot a look of disbelief toward me, then back at the phone in her hand. "Mr. Hale, your son specifically said that he cannot miss this party for anything." She repeated his words slowly, as if she couldn't believe them herself. "He said he might visit tomorrow, if things work out." If things work out. As if my very survival was a mere scheduling conflict, an inconvenience to be penciled into his social calendar. Sarah returned to my bedside, her professional composure barely veiling her profound shock. "I am so sorry, Mr. Hale. Sometimes sometimes they just don't grasp the gravity of the situation, but I grasped it perfectly. For my son, Ethan, his father-in-law's birthday cake held more significance than his own father's last potential breaths. The man who had changed his diapers, who had proudly paid for his college degree, and who had loved him without condition for 35 years, was suddenly worth less than a social engagement he couldn't stand to miss. With a hand that trembled uncontrollably, I signed the consent forms for the surgery, my signature a barely legible scrawl. As they wheeled me toward the cardiac wing, a cold resolve settled over me, and I made a decision that would irrevocably alter both of our lives. Ethan had just shown me, with brutal honesty, exactly where I ranked on his list of priorities. In a twisted way, he'd given me a gift: the painful, undeniable clarity to see the person he truly was, stripped of the illusion of the son I thought I had raised. The surgery was a grueling 4-hour ordeal. I survived, of course, or I wouldn't be here telling you this story. But something inside me died on that operating table that night. Something that no surgeon, no medication, no amount of time could ever bring back to life. It wasn't my physical heart. The surgeons did a masterful job of fixing that with stents and modern medicine. What died was the deeply cherished illusion that my son loved me more than he loved his own convenience. When I awoke the next morning in the ICU, a vase of flowers sat on my bedside table. Lily's, Ethan's favorite, not mine. The card tucked inside read, "Sorry I couldn't be there last night. Hope you're feeling better. Love, Ethan." Hope you're feeling better. As if I'd merely had a tension headache instead of nearly dying alone while he was off eating cake and making toasts. I stared at those lilies for a long time, and for the first time in 35 years, I saw my son with perfect, unclouded vision. He was handsome, charming, and utterly, profoundly selfish. He was a man who could prioritize a party over his father's deathbed, and then send a generic bouquet the next day, as though that simple gesture could erase the magnitude of his betrayal. That morning, lying in that sterile hospital bed with machines diligently monitoring my newly repaired heart, I made 2 silent mental phone calls. The first was to my bank. The second was to my lawyer. Some people might call what I was about to do cruel. I called it educational. Ethan was about to get a masterclass in the concept of consequences, and he was about to learn that the father he'd so easily dismissed as an inconvenience was far from powerless. The old Arthur, the forgiving father, would have made excuses for his behavior, probably would have even apologized for the inconvenient timing of his heart attack. But the old Arthur had flatlined on that operating table. What was left was someone harder, colder, and infinitely more resolute than my charming son could ever possibly imagine. I was going to teach Ethan the most expensive lesson of his life, and I was going to do it legally, methodically, and with the kind of dispassionate precision that comes only when you have absolutely nothing left to lose. He had chosen his father-in-law's birthday over my potential death. Now, he would learn what it felt like to lose everything he had always taken for granted. Some stories begin with love. This one, however, begins with betrayal. The crucial difference, as I was about to find out, is that betrayal grants you permission to stop being merciful. 2 days after my discharge, I sat at my kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside my old address book. I was preparing to dismantle my son's future with the same painstaking care I had once used to build it. The first call was to my bank's fraud prevention department, Sterling Trust Bank. "This is Amanda speaking." "Hello, Amanda. This is Arthur Hale, account holder since 1987. I need to implement a complete overhaul of the security measures on all of my accounts, effective immediately." My 37 years as a nurse had taught me how to handle emergencies with clinical precision, and I approached this conversation with the same detached focus I'd once used to save lives. Only now, I was using it to save my assets. I want unique verbal passwords implemented on every single account. I want two-factor authentication required for any wire transfer exceeding $500. I want text alerts sent directly to my phone for any transaction over $100. And most importantly, I want to revoke any and all existing authorizations for other parties to access my accounts. There was a brief, professional silence on the other end. Mr. Hale, that's a very comprehensive security protocol. May I ask if you've recently experienced any suspicious activity? Not yet, I said carefully, choosing my words. But I have reason to believe I will, and I want to be proactive. What I didn't tell Amanda was that I had already done my homework. In the 2 days since I'd been home, I had meticulously reviewed 3 years' worth of bank statements with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant, and I had found exactly what I was looking for: a pattern of small, recurring withdrawals I hadn't authorized, a subscription to a streaming service I'd never heard of, Zelle transfers to names I didn't recognize, a series of cash withdrawals made from ATMs in Ethan's neighborhood during the same week I was visiting my brother in Florida last spring. My son had been testing the waters for years, siphoning off small amounts he assumed I would never notice. The pattern was undeniable once I knew to look for it. Ethan had been helping himself to my money whenever he thought I wasn't paying attention. I'll also need new debit cards issued for all accounts, I continued, my voice steady. Please, cancel the existing ones immediately. Certainly, Mr. Hale. Your new cards will arrive in 7 to 10 business days. Ethan had a spare card he'd borrowed 2 years ago for a supposed shopping emergency. He had promised to return it, but of course, he never had. Now, it was just a useless piece of plastic. My second call was to Tom Sullivan, the attorney who had managed my legal affairs for the better part of 15 years. Arthur, Tom said warmly, it's good to hear your voice. I heard about your hospital stay. How are you feeling? I'm feeling remarkably clear-headed, Tom. And I need to make some immediate and substantial changes to my estate planning. What kind of changes are we talking about? I want to establish a revocable living trust. I want Ethan removed as the beneficiary from everything: my will, my life insurance policies, my retirement accounts, everything. I also want a no-contest clause added that makes it crystal clear that if he dares to challenge any of this, he gets absolutely nothing. And Tom, I want it all drafted and finalized by tomorrow. The silence on Tom's end of the line stretched for several long seconds. Arthur, these are profound changes. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do? Tom, I'm 64 years old. I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. Can you handle this? Or do I need to find an attorney who can? Of course, I can handle it. But as your attorney and your friend, I have to ask, what precipitated this decision? I told him everything. I told him about the hospital, about Ethan's calculated choice to attend a birthday party rather than be with his potentially dying father. I told him about the insulting arrival of the flowers the next day, as if a simple bouquet could resurrect the paternal affection that had flatlined right alongside my heart monitor. I'm so sorry, Arthur. Don't be sorry, Tom. Be thorough. I want this to be completely bulletproof. I want corporate trustees who can't be swayed by charm or manipulation. I want to name beneficiaries who will genuinely deserve what they receive. And I want Ethan to learn, in no uncertain terms, that actions have consequences. What about his medical power of attorney? He's currently listed as your healthcare proxy. Revoke it immediately. If Ethan won't even show up at the hospital when I'm dying, he certainly shouldn't have the legal authority to make life or death decisions about my medical care. We spent the next hour meticulously going over the details. Tom would draft the new documents, naming a corporate trustee and changing every single beneficiary designation. We would establish a new will that specifically and explicitly disinherited Ethan, using language that made the decision irreversible. Any attempt on his part to contest the will would trigger the no contest clause, leaving him with absolutely nothing. As we were finishing up, Tom asked, "Arthur, is there any possibility of reconciliation here? Sometimes family members say things they don't mean in stressful situations." I considered his question for a moment. Had Ethan been stressed when he chose a party over my deathbed? Had he been confused about the gravity of my condition? Tom, the nurse, explicitly told Ethan that I might not survive the night. His response was that he couldn't miss his father-in-law's birthday party for anything in the world. Does that sound like a man who is confused about the severity of the situation? No, he said quietly. It doesn't. Then you have your answer. After I hung up, I made one more call, this time to Chris Vance, a retired bank investigator Tom had recommended for forensic accounting. If Ethan had been systematically stealing from me, I wanted ironclad documentation that would stand up in any court of law. Chris's voice was gravelly and all business. "Mr. Hale, Tom briefed me on your situation. I can have a preliminary analysis of your accounts completed within a week. If there's a pattern of systematic fraud, rest assured, we will find it. What exactly will you be looking for?" "Unauthorized access patterns, suspicious timing of transactions, IP address tracking for online banking, device fingerprints for any mobile banking apps. If someone has been accessing your accounts without your permission, they've left a trail of digital breadcrumbs. Our job is just to follow them." That afternoon, I sat in my garden, contemplating the bitter irony of it all. For years, Ethan had carefully cultivated the image of the loving son, my devoted caregiver in waiting, my eventual heir. He never missed a family gathering, always remembered my birthday with an expensive gift, and made certain that everyone in our circle saw what a wonderful, attentive son he was. But when the one moment arrived that truly mattered, when his father was lying in a hospital bed, potentially drawing his last breath, he had shown his true colors. Everything else had been a performance. The real Ethan was the man who couldn't be bothered to leave a birthday party, even when his father might die alone. Well, if Ethan wanted to prioritize other people over his own father, he was about to learn what it felt like to be deprioritized himself legally, methodically, and completely. I watered my rose bushes and planned the systematic dismantling of my son's entitled expectations. Some people plant gardens to create beauty. I was planting legal landmines to create justice. The old Arthur would have been racked with guilt over what he was planning. The new Arthur felt nothing but a cold, surgical precision. Ethan had taught me that family loyalty was conditional. Now, I was going to teach him that inheritance was even more so. Revenge without evidence is just impotent anger. Evidence without a solid plan is just raw frustration. What I needed was both meticulously assembled and legally unassailable. Chris Vance arrived at my house a week later, precisely on time, carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked as if it had witnessed decades of financial crime scenes. He was a lean man with steel-gray hair and the kind of sharp, discerning eyes that missed nothing. He was exactly the person I needed. "Mr. Hale, I've already completed the preliminary review of your account access logs," he began, forgoing any small talk. "The patterns are quite illuminating." He spread a series of printouts across my dining room table, arranging them like a detective laying out evidence in a murder case. Your son has been accessing your online banking portal consistently for approximately 18 months, he stated, his tone matter of fact. And he always does it during times when you were either away from home or medically incapacitated. Chris pointed to a detailed timeline he had created. Here, 3 unauthorized Zelle transfers made during your hospital stay for gallbladder surgery last year. And here, a series of cash withdrawals from ATMs located near his residence while you were visiting your brother in Florida. Look here, online bill pay authorizations for services you've never used, all set up during the week you were housebound with pneumonia. I studied the documents with the same intense focus I once gave to patient charts. The pattern was sickeningly clear. Ethan viewed my incapacitation not as a crisis, but as an opportunity. Every single time I was vulnerable, he had helped himself to what was mine. How much are we talking about, Chris? Conservatively, I'd estimate about $12,000 in direct theft over the last 18 months. But that's just what he transferred or withdrew. The unauthorized subscriptions and services add another $3,000 to the total. $15,000. The numbers settled in my chest like a shard of ice. He had been stealing from his father, who was at times fighting for his life. There's more, Mr. Hale, Chris continued grimly. I found evidence that he's been using your personal information to open credit monitoring services and various subscription accounts. He has your social security number, your mother's maiden name, access to enough of your personal data to potentially commit full-scale identity theft. Chris opened another folder. I also need to show you this. He pointed to a credit report inquiry from 6 months prior. Someone used your information to check your credit score. The inquiry originated from his home IP address. Why would he need to see my credit score? People usually check someone's credit score for 2 reasons. They're planning to apply for loans using that person's identity, or they're assessing the person's overall financial health for other purposes. Other purposes, like determining just how much money his father had left for him to steal. Chris, I said, a new, cold plan forming in my mind. I need you to continue monitoring all my accounts, but I also want you to help me set up something else. I want to set a trap. His eyebrows rose just slightly. What kind of trap did you have in mind? I want to open a new checking account, one with obvious vulnerabilities. Old-school online banking, a simple password, the kind of easy access Ethan has grown accustomed to. But I want that account monitored 24 hours a day. The very moment he attempts to access it or transfer a single dollar, I want alerts sent to you, to me, and to the police. For the first time since he'd arrived, Chris Vance allowed himself a small, thin smile. A honeypot account. Very smart. We'll fund it with enough money to make it tempting, say $5,000, but not so much that it constitutes a major loss if something goes wrong. How long do you think it will take for him to find it? Based on his established access patterns, he's been checking your accounts every 2 to 3 weeks. I'd estimate he'll discover the new account within a month and attempt to access it within 6 weeks. That evening, I called my next-door neighbor, Carol Peterson. Carol was 72, sharp as a tack, and her kitchen window offered the best view of my driveway on the entire street. Carol, I need to ask you about something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, Arthur. What's on your mind? Over the past year or so, have you happened to see Ethan at my house at times when you knew I wasn't home? There was a long, hesitant pause on the other end of the line. Arthur, I didn't want to say anything because I just assumed you had given him permission. Just tell me what you saw, Carol, please. On 3 or 4 occasions, I saw his car in your driveway when I knew your car wasn't there. Once, I saw him carrying what looked like a shoebox out to his car. Another time, he was loading what looked like books or maybe papers into his trunk. I just figured you'd asked him to pick some things up for you. My grandfather's collection of rare coins, which I kept in a shoebox, was missing from my closet. I had noticed it was gone the week before, but had chalked it up to misplacing it during my recovery. I had also noticed that some important papers in my desk drawer seemed to have been shuffled around. Did you happen to notice what time of day these visits usually occurred? Always during the week, usually mid-morning, when most people would be at work. But when a retired nurse would normally be home, unless that retired nurse was in the hospital, visiting family, or laid up with pneumonia. Carol, if I were to ask you to testify in a legal proceeding about what you saw, would you be willing to do that? Testify. Arthur, what in the world is going on? I'm building a case against someone who has been stealing from me. Someone who has been taking advantage of my health problems to rob me blind. Oh my God, Ethan, she whispered, her voice hardening with indignation. Yes, yes, Arthur. If you need me to testify, I will absolutely do it. I saw what I saw, and I'll swear to it in court. The very next morning, I had a comprehensive security system installed. Cameras now covered every entrance, along with motion detectors and a monitored alarm system. If Ethan wanted to continue his unauthorized visits, he'd be doing it on high-definition film. I also did something else. I strategically placed certain items around the house. My old checkbook was left in the desk drawer where he'd expect to find it, but it was for an account that had already been closed. A few blank checks were left on the kitchen counter, but they were for accounts that no longer existed. Legal-looking documents were left visible in my home office, but they were just copies of old, superseded versions. If Ethan decided to break into my house looking for financial information or valuables, he would find exactly what I wanted him to find: bait. And he would create irrefutable evidence of his criminal intent, all captured on video. That afternoon, Tom called with an update. The legal restructuring was complete. Arthur, everything you requested has been executed and officially recorded. Ethan is no longer a beneficiary on anything. The no contest clause is ironclad. If he so much as thinks about challenging this, he gets nothing. What about the medical power of attorney? Revoked and replaced. Your new healthcare proxy is a professional patient advocate who will follow your explicit wishes, not their own agenda. Good, I said. Now we wait. Arthur, are you absolutely certain about this path? Once criminal charges are filed, there's no turning back. I thought about Ethan's voice on the phone that awful night in the hospital. I can't miss it for anything in the world. I thought about him choosing birthday cake over his father's last breaths. I thought about the $15,000 he had stolen from me during my moments of greatest vulnerability. Tom, he made his choices. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Some fathers would have felt an overwhelming sense of guilt about setting such an elaborate trap for their own son. Some fathers would have agonized over the decision to disinherit their only child. But I wasn't some fathers anymore. I was a father who had nearly died alone while his son ate cake. I was a father who had been systematically robbed by the very person who should have been protecting him. And I was a father who was about to teach his son that exploitation is a crime, regardless of shared DNA. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for Ethan to walk right into it. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, carrying a bouquet of lilies and wearing the kind of disarming smile that had been getting him out of trouble since he was 5 years old. I watched him on my new security camera feed as he approached the front door, noting how he instinctively checked the windows first. An old habit from his previous unauthorized visits, I supposed. Ethan looked perfect as he always did. His dark hair was stylishly cut, his clothes expensive, his designer watch coordinated with shoes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 35, he had cultivated the kind of handsome charm that opened doors and deflected questions. But charm had never been a measure of trustworthiness, and I was long past the point of being swayed by his polished appearance. I opened the door before he could knock, my own expression carefully neutral. "Hello, Ethan." "Dad." He stepped forward to give me a hug, a gesture I accepted but did not return. It felt practiced, performative. "How are you feeling? You look incredible for someone who just had a major heart attack." Incredible for someone who just had a heart attack. Even his concern was laced with a backhanded qualification. "I'm recovering well, thank you. Come in." He followed me into the living room, and I watched his eyes dart around the space, scanning for changes, assessing, cataloging. Ethan had always been observant when it served his own purposes. "I brought you lilies," he said, placing the vase on the coffee table. "Your favorites." They were not my favorites. They were his. But I thanked him anyway and offered to make some tea, just as I had done for 35 years whenever Ethan wanted something from me. While I was in the kitchen, I listened to Ethan wander through the house with the casual familiarity of someone who already considered it partly his own. I heard his footsteps on the hardwood floors, heard the soft sound of drawers opening and closing in my home office. The security cameras were recording his every move, and the hidden audio system was capturing every subtle sound. When I returned with the tea service, Ethan was seated on the sofa, a look of appropriate contrition arranged on his face. "Dad, I need to apologize for the other night. I know you must have been scared. And I feel terrible that I didn't come to the hospital immediately." I settled into my armchair and poured the tea, taking my time. "Tell me about Leonard's birthday party. Was it everything you'd hoped for?" Ethan blinked, clearly thrown off by my unexpected response. "It was. It was nice. But I kept thinking about you. I felt awful the whole time." "Awful enough to leave?" "Well, no, but not awful enough to actually come and see your potentially dying father." A flicker of raw irritation crossed his handsome face before he quickly smoothed it away. "Dad, you know I would have come if it had been really, really serious. The doctor said you were stable." That was a lie. I had spoken with Nurse Sarah Jenkins the day before my discharge to clarify exactly what she had communicated to Ethan. Sarah had been explicit about the severity of my condition and the profound uncertainty of my survival. "Ethan, the nurse told you that I might not make it through the night. How much more serious could it possibly have been?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I guess I just thought, you're so strong, Dad. You've always been so strong. I just knew you'd pull through." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence he had always used to rewrite reality to suit his own narrative. "So, you chose to stay at the party because you were so confident I would survive?" "I chose to stay because I had made a commitment to Leonard. Family obligations are important, Dad. I thought you, of all people, would understand that. Family obligations." I set down my teacup with deliberate, measured care. "You're absolutely right, Ethan. Family obligations are incredibly important. And speaking of which, I've been reviewing my finances since I got home from the hospital, and I've noticed some irregularities." I watched his face closely. There it was, a micro-expression of pure panic, quickly suppressed and hidden behind a mask of polite concern. "What kind of irregularities?" "Transactions I don't recall authorizing. Zelle transfers to people I don't know. Cash withdrawals from ATMs I've never used. It's all quite concerning." Ethan's smile never wavered, but I saw his hand tremble slightly as he reached for his teacup. "Wow, that does sound concerning. Maybe someone has been using your information fraudulently." Maybe, I said, letting the word hang in the air between us. Or maybe someone I trusted has been helping themselves to my accounts during times when I was too sick or too distracted to notice. The silence stretched between us like a tightening wire. Dad, are you suggesting that I'm not suggesting anything, Ethan. I'm simply stating the facts. Someone has been accessing my accounts without my permission. Someone who knows my personal information and my banking habits. Someone who seems to know exactly when I'm too incapacitated to monitor my own finances. Ethan stood up abruptly, his face a mask of wounded pride. I cannot believe you would accuse me of stealing from you. After everything I've done for this family. After all the times I've helped you with technology and banking. Helped me with technology and banking. An interesting euphemism for theft. Ethan, when exactly have you helped me with my banking? Well, I've shown you how to use the mobile app, and I helped you set up online bill pay. You mean you helped yourself to my login information while pretending to teach me how to use it? His face flushed a deep, angry red. How dare you? I'm your son, not some common criminal. Those two things are not mutually exclusive categories, Ethan. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. I don't have to stand here and listen to this. When you're ready to apologize for these horrible, baseless accusations, you know how to reach me. Ethan, before you go, I have something I need to tell you. He turned back, his expression a perfect portrait of righteous indignation. I've made some significant changes to my estate planning. You are no longer the beneficiary of anything. Not my will, not my life insurance, not my retirement accounts. I have also officially revoked your medical power of attorney. The color drained completely from his face. You can't be serious. I'm deadly serious. I've learned that family obligations only seem to matter to people who actually honor them. Dad, you're overreacting. You're just being emotional because of the heart attack. On the contrary, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. You showed me exactly where I stand on your list of priorities, Ethan. Now I'm simply showing you where you stand on mine. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw a cold, calculating flicker in his eyes. You'll change your mind, he said finally, his voice laced with arrogance. When you realize how much you need me, you'll change it all back. I don't think I will. After he left, I sat in my quiet living room and immediately reviewed the security footage on my tablet. I watched the recording of Ethan moving through my office, saw him surreptitiously opening desk drawers and shuffling through my papers. I saw him take several photographs of documents with his phone. But most damningly, I watched him take a small notebook from his pocket and carefully write down information he found in my desk. Information like account numbers and the location of my safe. The trap was working perfectly. Ethan thought he was gathering intelligence for his next round of theft. In reality, he was meticulously creating evidence for his own future prosecution. That evening, Chris called with an update. Mr. Hale, your son accessed your online banking portal at 3:17 p.m. today, roughly an hour after he left your house. He spent 12 minutes reviewing your account balances and transaction histories. Did he try to move any money? Not yet. But he did do something very interesting. He attempted to add his email address to your account's alert system. The bank's new security protocols immediately blocked the attempt and flagged it as suspicious. Perfect. Ethan was escalating. He was getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Chris, how long before you think he tries something more aggressive? Based on his established behavioral patterns, I'd give it 2 weeks, maybe less. The news of his disinheritance will make him feel cornered, and cornered people make very poor decisions. I hung up the phone and poured myself a glass of wine. Outside my window, the sun was setting over the garden I had so carefully cultivated for 20 years. Ethan had always admired this house, had often commented on how much he was looking forward to inheriting it someday. He had foolishly assumed that my love for him was a guarantee of his financial future. He had counted on a father's affection to override a father's better judgment. He had been wrong on both counts. Some children earn their inheritance through love, loyalty, and care. Ethan had tried to secure his through exploitation and abandonment. The difference between those two approaches was about to become a very, very expensive lesson for him to learn. Tom Sullivan's law office smelled of old leather, lemon polish, and money. It was exactly the kind of place where important documents went to become unbreakable truths. I sat across from his vast mahogany desk, watching him prepare the final papers that would formalize Ethan's complete and total disinheritance. "Arthur, these documents are ironclad," Tom said, sliding the stack of papers across the polished wood toward me. "The revocation of his power of attorney is effective immediately and has already been recorded with the county clerk. The new trust documents explicitly exclude Ethan as a beneficiary, and the no contest clause we added ensures that any attempt on his part to challenge your decisions will result in him receiving absolutely nothing." I reviewed each page with meticulous care, my nurse's training having made me naturally attentive to the kinds of details that could save or destroy lives. These documents would destroy Ethan's expectations, but they were essential to saving my own financial life. What about the transfer on death deed for the house? "Executed and recorded. Upon your passing, the property will transfer directly to the charitable trust we established. Ethan has no legal claim to it whatsoever." I signed each document with the same steady hand I had once used to administer life-saving medications. The irony was not lost on me. I was using the precision of my medical training to perform a different kind of surgery, excising the diseased branch that had been poisoning my entire family tree. "Tom, I need you to send copies of all the revocation documents to Ethan via certified mail. I want him to receive formal legal notification that he no longer holds any authority over my affairs." "Of course. But Arthur, you need to be prepared for his reaction. This is going to come as a profound shock." "Good," I said. "Shock can be educational." My next stop was Sterling Trust Bank, where I met with Amanda from the fraud department and her supervisor, a sharp man named Michael Torres. "Mr. Hale, we've completed all the security upgrades you requested," Amanda said. "All of your existing accounts now require verbal passwords and dual authentication for any transfers over $500. We've also successfully set up the monitoring account as you instructed." Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "I have to ask, Mr. Hale, are you actively expecting someone to attempt unauthorized access to your accounts?" "I'm not just expecting it, Michael. I'm planning for it. Someone very close to me has been systematically stealing from my accounts for over a year. I have concrete evidence of unauthorized access, fraudulent transfers, and what amounts to identity theft. When they make their next move, I want them caught red-handed." "Have you contacted law enforcement yet?" "I've been building a comprehensive case with the help of a forensic accountant. When we have enough evidence to guarantee a conviction, I will involve the police. Until then, I need your help to catch them in the act." Amanda pulled out a new folder. The monitoring account is set up with a balance of $5,000 and has only basic online banking access. It's designed to look like a standard checking account you might use for everyday expenses. The moment someone attempts to access it or transfer funds, automated alerts will be sent to you, to me, and to Detective Mark Riley at the City Police Department. "Detective Riley is already involved?" Michael nodded. "We've worked with him on several complex financial fraud cases. He has agreed to coordinate with us if and when your suspect makes their move. Perfect. Ethan thought he was dealing with his naive, trusting, elderly father. Instead, he was walking into a carefully orchestrated sting operation involving bank security, forensic accounting, and local law enforcement. That afternoon, I had one more crucial meeting with Dr. Evelyn Reed, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in cases of elder abuse. Mr. Hale, I want to make sure you fully understand what you're dealing with, Doctor, Reed said, her tone both professional and compassionate. Financial exploitation of elderly parents by their adult children is far more common than most people realize. It often starts small and escalates over time, especially when the perpetrator develops a sense of entitlement to their parents' assets. What should I expect as this situation develops? Your son will likely become increasingly desperate as he realizes his access to your money has been completely cut off. He may become manipulative, trying to guilt you into reversing your decisions. He may even recruit other family members to pressure you. And if he's been stealing from you systematically, as you suspect, he may attempt a more aggressive form of financial fraud to replace the income stream he's just lost. You mean he'll try to steal a larger amount? Almost certainly. And when he does, he will likely make critical mistakes that will provide law enforcement with clear, irrefutable evidence of his criminal intent. That evening, I received an angry call from Ethan's wife, Jessica. Her voice was tight with rage. "Arthur, what the hell are you doing? Ethan came home in tears because you've accused him of stealing and have completely disinherited him. This is insane." "Hello, Jessica. Tell me, how was Leonard's birthday party?" There was a confused pause. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It has everything to do with everything. Your husband chose to stay at that party instead of being with his potentially dying father. That choice revealed his true priorities, and I have adjusted my estate planning accordingly. You can't punish Ethan forever because he made one mistake." "It wasn't one mistake, Jessica. It was the culmination of a pattern of behavior that ended with him abandoning me during a life-threatening medical emergency. And now I have discovered that he's been stealing from me for over a year." "That's ridiculous. Ethan would never do that." "Jessica, I have bank records, digital forensic reports, and witness testimony. Your husband has been systematically robbing me during my moments of greatest vulnerability. The evidence is overwhelming and incontrovertible." "I don't believe you." "Believe whatever you want, Jessica. The courts, however, will be interested in facts, not beliefs." She hung up on me, which I took as confirmation that Ethan had indeed shared all the details of our conversation with her. Good. Let them both understand that this wasn't some emotional overreaction on my part. It was a cold, calculated response to their calculated theft. Chris Vance called me later that evening with another update. "Mr. Hale, your son attempted to access your main checking account twice today. Once at 2 p.m. and again at 6 p.m. Both attempts were blocked by the new security protocols. He also tried to call the bank's customer service line and, using your social security number, requested account information. They flagged the call as suspicious because his voice didn't match your voice print on file. He's getting desperate. Very. And desperate people make mistakes. I expect he'll try something much more aggressive within the next few days." I spent that evening meticulously organizing my evidence files. The bank statements showing unauthorized transactions, the digital forensic reports proving Ethan's devices had accessed my accounts, the signed witness statement from Carol about Ethan's unauthorized visits to my house, and the medical records from the hospital detailing the severity of my heart attack, and Ethan's refusal to come. Each piece of evidence was dated, notarized, and filed in precise chronological order. When the time came to present this case to a prosecutor, I wanted every single detail to be beyond reproach. The certified mail from Tom's office arrived at Ethan's house the next morning. I knew because my security system alerted me that his car was pulling into my driveway at 11:23 a.m., and he was out of the vehicle before it had even come to a complete stop. He pounded on my front door with enough force to rattle the entire frame. "Dad, open this door right now." I opened it calmly, noting that the cameras were recording everything. "Hello, Ethan. You seem upset." He waved the certified mail envelope in my face like a weapon. "What is this? What is this legal garbage about revoking my power of attorney?" "It's exactly what it says it is. You no longer have any legal authority over my affairs. You can't do this. I'm your only son. Being someone's son doesn't grant you a license to steal from them or abandon them when they're dying." Ethan's face was flushed a deep mottled red, his carefully constructed composure completely shattered. "I didn't abandon you. I made one mistake, and you're destroying our entire relationship over it." "One mistake?" "Ethan, you have been systematically stealing from my bank accounts for over a year. You've been using my personal information to open unauthorized services. You've been entering my home without my permission and taking items that do not belong to you. This isn't one mistake. This is a sustained criminal enterprise." "That's not true. I've never stolen anything from you." I stepped aside and gestured toward my living room. "Ethan, would you like to come in and discuss this like rational adults?" He pushed past me, his expensive shoes clicking angrily on my hardwood floors. What he didn't know was that by entering my house in his current agitated state, he was about to provide me with even more invaluable evidence. "Dad, this is ridiculous. You're being paranoid and confused because of the heart attack. You need to reverse all of these legal changes before you do permanent damage to our family." "Our family?" "Ethan, where was our family when I was dying alone in the hospital? I was honoring a commitment. That's what responsible adults do. Responsible adults do not steal $15,000 from their father's bank accounts." He went very still. "What did you just say?" $15,000, Ethan. That's the conservative total my forensic accountant calculated you've stolen from me over the past 18 months. Would you like to see the documentation? I pulled out Chris's detailed report and spread it across the coffee table. Ethan stared at the irrefutable evidence of his own crimes, his face cycling through a rapid succession of shock, denial, and finally cold calculation. "You hired a forensic accountant? You hired someone to investigate your own son." "I hired someone to investigate systematic theft from my accounts. The fact that the thief turned out to be my son is deeply unfortunate, but it doesn't change the evidence." Ethan sank onto my sofa, his hands shaking. "Dad, if I took some money, it was only because I knew you'd want to help me if I asked. I was just saving you the awkwardness of having to say no. If I took some money," the conditional admission that confirmed everything I already suspected. "So you stole from me to save me from the awkwardness of refusing to give you money?" "I didn't steal. I borrowed. I was going to pay it all back." "When, Ethan? When exactly? Were you planning to pay back $15,000? He couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. He had never intended to pay back a single cent. Ethan had come to view my bank accounts as his own personal emergency fund, one that was available for withdrawal whenever he felt entitled to access it. "Dad, please," he begged, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry. I'll pay it all back, I promise. Just please don't involve lawyers and accountants. Please don't destroy our relationship over money." I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was still handsome, still charming, still capable of summoning tears whenever they served his purposes. But I saw him clearly now for what he was. Ethan was a thief who happened to share my DNA. Nothing more and nothing less. "Ethan, Our relationship was destroyed the night you chose birthday cake over your dying father. Everything that has happened since then has just been documentation." He stood up abruptly. "Fine. If you want to play hardball, we'll play hardball. I'll contest the will. I'll have you declared incompetent. I'll prove to a judge that you're too old and confused to be making rational decisions about your own estate." For the first time during his entire visit, I smiled. "Ethan, please do contest the will. Please do try to have me declared incompetent. I strongly encourage you to pursue every single legal option available to you." He looked completely baffled by my response. "Why would you want me to contest the will?" "Because, my son, I've included a very specific no contest clause. The moment you challenge any aspect of my estate planning, you are automatically and irrevocably disinherited from everything. You'll go from getting nothing to being legally prohibited from ever getting anything. So please, by all means, contest the will." The color drained from his face as he finally realized the intricate legal trap I had set for him. Any legal challenge he mounted would only serve to legally confirm his own disinheritance. "You planned this," he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "You planned all of this." "I plan to protect myself from someone who has been systematically exploiting me. If that someone happens to be my son, then so be it." Ethan gathered his things and stormed toward the door. "This isn't over, Dad. I will find a way to fight this." "Ethan, one more thing." He turned back, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "The next time you access my bank accounts without authorization or attempt to use my personal information for any purpose or enter my house without my permission, you will be arrested." The police are already involved, and they are actively monitoring the situation. Don't make this any worse for yourself than it already is. After he left, I sat in my living room and reviewed the security footage of his visit. I watched him admit to taking money from my accounts. I listened to him threaten to contest the will and have me declared incompetent. I saw his fury when he realized the legal trap I had so carefully constructed. Most importantly, I now had a recorded confession of his financial theft, along with his threats against my legal decisions. Chris Vance called 20 minutes later. "Mr. Hale, your son just attempted to access the monitoring account. He tried to transfer the entire $5,000 balance to an account registered under his wife's name. Did the transfer go through?" "No, but he tried 3 times. Each attempt has been documented, time-stamped, and flagged by bank security. Detective Riley has been notified." "Perfect." Ethan had just provided law enforcement with clear, irrefutable evidence of attempted financial fraud, committed in a moment of pure desperation and caught in real time. The paper wall I had constructed around my assets was working exactly as I had designed it. Ethan could no longer access my money. He couldn't challenge my legal decisions without severe penalty, and he couldn't manipulate me into reversing course. But more importantly, his desperate attempts to circumvent my protections had created a clear, damning trail of evidence that would soon land him in handcuffs. Some children learn from their mistakes. Others simply doubled down on them until they become felony charges. Ethan had just chosen his path. The call came at 10:42 on a Wednesday morning. I was sitting in my garden, reading a book and enjoying the crisp autumn sunshine when my phone buzzed with Detective Riley's number. "Mr. Hale, your son is at Sterling Trust Bank right now, attempting to wire $15,000 from the monitoring account. Can you get here in 20 minutes? I set down my book and checked my appearance in the hallway mirror. Pearl gray sweater, navy blazer, the kind of understated, respectable attire that made people take me seriously. Today, I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a responsible citizen whose trust had been systematically violated by the person who should have been protecting him. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, detective." I drove to the bank with the calm, measured precision of someone who had spent months planning for this exact moment. Every detail had been meticulously orchestrated. Every legal requirement had been satisfied, and every piece of evidence had been documented and verified. Ethan thought he was pulling off a desperate last-ditch heist. In reality, he was walking into a trap that had been waiting for him since the night he chose birthday cake over my deathbed. I parked across the street from the bank and called Detective Riley. "I'm here, Detective. What's the situation?" "Your son is inside with a forged power of attorney document, trying to convince the branch manager to authorize a wire transfer. The document is professionally made. It looks legitimate at first glance, but we both know it's a forgery because you revoked his power of attorney weeks ago." "Exactly. The revocation is on file with the county clerk and was sent to the bank's legal department. Your son is attempting to use a legal document that he knows for a fact has been invalidated. That, in itself, is criminal fraud." I could see Ethan through the bank's large plate glass windows. He was seated at a desk, gesturing animatedly at a middle-aged man in a suit, who I assumed was the branch manager. He looked confident, entitled, and absolutely certain that his combination of charm and forged paperwork would get him what he wanted. He had no idea that the bank's security cameras were recording his every move, that the FBI had already been notified about the potential for federal financial fraud, and that his own father was sitting across the street, watching him commit multiple felonies in real time. "Detective, what happens next?" "The branch manager is going to tell your son that the transfer requires additional verification. When he insists on proceeding despite the obvious problems with his documentation, we will have clear evidence of his criminal intent. Then I'll make the arrest." "Will I need to testify?" "Almost certainly. This is going to trial, Mr. Hale. Your son is facing multiple federal charges: wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, and forgery. The evidence against him is overwhelming, but we will need your testimony to establish the pattern of unauthorized access and to explain the full timeline of events." Through the bank windows, I watched Ethan's entire demeanor shift. The branch manager had obviously delivered the unwelcome news because his posture went from confident and relaxed to tense and aggressive. He leaned forward, pointing angrily at the documents, his voice rising to a level where other customers were starting to notice. "He's not taking no for an answer," I told Detective Riley. "Good. The more he insists on proceeding with fraudulent documents, the stronger our case against him becomes." 5 minutes later, Detective Riley and 2 uniformed officers entered the bank. I watched Ethan's face morph from irritation to confusion, and then to dawning horror as he finally realized what was happening. The detective approached Ethan's table and spoke quietly to the branch manager, who nodded and quickly stepped away. Then, Detective Riley sat down across from my son and introduced himself. I couldn't hear their conversation through the thick glass, but I could read Ethan's body language perfectly. Shock, denial, indignation, and finally, raw panic. All the classic stages of someone whose carefully constructed world of lies was crumbling around him in real time. Detective Riley held up several evidence bags: the forged power of attorney, Ethan's identification, the wire transfer request form. Each item was photographed and documented, while Ethan sat frozen in his chair, a statue of disbelief. Then, Detective Riley stood up and said something that made my son's face go bone white. A moment later, one of the uniformed officers stepped forward with a pair of handcuffs. "Mr. Ethan Hale, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent." Ethan's mouth was moving, but I couldn't tell if he was speaking or just gasping for air. His perfectly styled dark hair fell across his face as the officer guided his hands behind his back. His expensive leather briefcase fell to the floor, spilling its contents across the bank's polished marble tiles. Other customers were openly staring now, some even taking photos with their phones. Ethan's public humiliation was absolute and complete. Arrested in broad daylight, led away in handcuffs, his criminal behavior exposed for the entire world to see. As they escorted him toward the door, Ethan looked through the bank's windows and saw me sitting in my car across the street. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that instant, I saw the exact moment he understood that I had orchestrated everything. His father, the man he had dismissed as too old and too confused to protect himself, had outmaneuvered him completely. The man he had tried to exploit had, instead, engineered his arrest and his inevitable prosecution. I didn't smile or wave or show any reaction at all. I simply watched as the son who had abandoned me in my moment of greatest need was led away to face the legal consequences of his systematic financial abuse. Detective Riley called me as Ethan was being loaded into the back of the police car. "Mr. Hale, we'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. The federal prosecutor will want to interview you about the full pattern of unauthorized access and theft." "Of course, Detective. What charges is Ethan facing, exactly?" "Wire fraud carries a sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. Identity theft is another 15. Elder financial abuse is a state felony with a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years. The forgery charges add another 5 years on top of that. If he's convicted on all counts, he's looking at decades in prison." Decades in prison. The son who had been too busy for his dying father would now have plenty of time to sit and think about his priorities while serving a federal sentence. What about bail? Given the systematic nature of the fraud and the clear flight risk assessment, I expect the judge will set his bail quite high. Your son is going to be in custody for a while. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through the affluent neighborhoods where Ethan had once lived, worked, and socialized. By tomorrow, everyone he knew would hear about his arrest. The local newspaper would run the story. His friends would see his mugshot circulating on social media. His wife's family would learn that their charming son-in-law was a federal criminal. Ethan had always cared so deeply about his reputation, his social standing, and his appearance of success and respectability. All of that was gone now, utterly destroyed in the span of a single morning at a bank where he had tried to steal from the father he had so callously abandoned. That evening, Jessica called me. Her voice was hollow, defeated. "Arthur, they arrested Ethan at the bank today. He's in federal custody. You planned this, didn't you? You set him up." I protected myself from someone who had been systematically stealing from me. The fact that it was my son doesn't change the criminal nature of his actions. "He's the father of your grandchildren, Arthur. How could you do this to them?" "Jessica, Ethan did this to himself and to his children. I simply ensured that his crimes would have consequences. The bail hearing is tomorrow. Will you help us pay it?" "No. Arthur, please. He made mistakes, but he doesn't deserve to rot in jail." "He made choices, Jessica. Deliberate, calculated choices to exploit my health problems and steal my money. Now, he gets to live with the results of those choices." "What about the grandchildren? They need their father." I thought about Emma and Noah, 8 and 10 years old, who would now grow up knowing their father was a convicted felon. It was a tragedy, but it was a tragedy authored by Ethan's own greed, not by my pursuit of justice. "Jessica, Ethan should have thought about his children before he decided to commit multiple federal crimes. That responsibility was his, not mine." After I hung up the phone, I sat in my living room and looked at the collection of family photos I had been meaning to update. There were pictures from Ethan's graduations, his wedding, holidays where he had smiled and hugged me and played the role of the loving son to perfection. I took down every single photo that included Ethan and stored them away in a box in the back of my closet. The man in those pictures had been an illusion, a carefully crafted performance designed to maintain his access to my bank accounts and his claim on my eventual inheritance. The real Ethan was the person who had been arrested today. A thief who had exploited his father's love and vulnerability for 18 months, who had abandoned his dying father for a birthday party, and who had responded to being cut off from his victim by committing increasingly serious crimes. I replaced Ethan's photos with pictures of my garden, my volunteer work at the local literacy center, and my book club friends' images of a life that was mine and mine alone, free from exploitation and manipulation. Some fathers would have felt an overwhelming sense of guilt about their son's arrest. Some fathers would have blamed themselves for not being more understanding, more forgiving, more patient, but I wasn't some fathers anymore. I was a father who had survived both a heart attack and a son's betrayal. I was a father who had chosen legal justice over paternal enablement. And I was a father who was, at long last, finally free. The first call came from Jessica at 6 a.m., the morning after Ethan's arrest. Her voice was tight with desperation and barely controlled anger. "Arthur, you have to drop the charges. Ethan's been in jail all night, and the bail hearing isn't until this afternoon. This is completely insane. He's your own son." I was already awake, having slept more soundly than I had in months. There is something deeply restful about knowing that the person who has been systematically exploiting you is no longer free to continue their crimes. "Jessica, I can't drop federal charges. Once the FBI takes over a case involving wire fraud and elder abuse, it's completely out of my hands. Ethan will have to answer to the federal prosecutor now. But you could tell them you don't want to press charges, that it was all just a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Jessica. Ethan systematically stole $15,000 from my accounts and then attempted to commit wire fraud using forged legal documents. Those are facts, not misunderstandings." The second call came from Leonard Carter, Ethan's father-in-law, the man whose birthday party had been deemed more important than my own life. "Arthur, I just don't understand how you could do this to Ethan. He made one little mistake, and you're destroying his entire life over it." "One little mistake?" I almost laughed out loud. "Leonard, Ethan committed multiple felonies over an 18-month period. The only little mistake he made was getting caught, but he's always been such a good son to you. He talks about you all the time, says how much he loves and worries about you. Then why didn't he come to the hospital when I was dying?" Silence on the other end of the line. "Leonard, your birthday party was more important to Ethan than his own father's life. That tells you everything you need to know about his priorities." The third call was from Ethan's old high school friend, a man named Brian, who had apparently been recruited into the campaign to save Ethan from the consequences of his own actions. "Mr. Hale, I know Ethan made some poor choices, but federal prison? Don't you think that's a bit excessive for what is essentially a family dispute?" "Brian, this is not a family dispute. This is a criminal prosecution. Ethan committed wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, and forgery. Those are serious crimes with very serious penalties. But you're his father. Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive him. Forgiveness and accountability are not mutually exclusive, Brian. I can forgive Ethan while still ensuring that he faces justice for his crimes." By mid-morning, my phone was ringing incessantly. Friends of Ethan's, neighbors who had heard about the arrest, even a few members of my own book club who thought I was being too harsh. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about my decision to hold my own son accountable. I finally stopped answering the phone and let all the calls go to voicemail. Let them talk. Let them judge. Let them think I was a cruel, vindictive father who was destroying his son's life over a little money. The truth was far simpler. I was a father who had finally stopped enabling his son's criminal behavior. That afternoon, I met with Assistant U.S. Attorney Matthew Cole at the federal courthouse. Matthew was a sharp, no-nonsense man about Ethan's age. But where Ethan projected an air of entitled charm, Matthew radiated competent authority. "Mr. Hale, I want you to understand that we have a very strong case," he began. "Your son left an extensive digital trail, and his attempt to use forged documents at the bank gave us clear, irrefutable evidence of his criminal intent. What's the timeline for prosecution?" "The grand jury will meet next week to consider the indictment. Based on the overwhelming evidence, I fully expect they will indict on all charges. After that, we will proceed to trial, unless your son decides to accept a plea agreement." "What kind of plea agreement would you offer?" "Given the strength of our case, I'd be willing to offer 5 years in federal prison, full restitution of all the stolen funds, and 10 years of supervised probation upon his release. If he takes this to trial and loses, he's looking at a sentence of 15 to 20 years. 15 to 20 years. The son who had been too busy for his dying father would now spend the next 2 decades of his life in a federal prison." "Mr. Hale," Matthew said, his gaze steady, "I have to ask, are you prepared for the emotional difficulty of testifying against your own son in open court?" "Matthew, my son made the conscious choice to exploit my health problems in order to steal from me systematically. He abandoned me during a life-threatening medical emergency. He forged legal documents to commit wire fraud. The emotional difficulty was watching someone I loved transform into someone I could no longer trust. Testifying will be the easy part." That evening, Ethan's defense attorney called me. His name was Daniel Shaw, and his voice carried the practiced, smooth tone of someone who specialized in making criminal behavior sound like a series of unfortunate misunderstandings. "Mr. Hale, I'm representing your son in this matter. I was hoping to discuss the possibility of resolving this situation without the need for a trial." "What did you have in mind, Mr. Shaw?" "Ethan acknowledges that he made some poor financial decisions. He is prepared to pay full restitution and to attend financial counseling. In exchange, perhaps you could speak with the prosecutor about reducing the charges against him." Poor financial decisions. Not theft, not fraud, not abandoning his dying father. Just poor decisions. "Mr. Shaw, did Ethan happen to tell you about the night I had my heart attack?" "I don't see how that's relevant to the financial charges." "It's relevant because it establishes Ethan's character and his priorities. When the hospital called to inform him that I might not survive the night, he made the deliberate choice to stay at a birthday party instead of being with his potentially dying father. That single decision revealed who he really is." "Mr. Hale, surely you can understand that people sometimes make poor choices when they are under stress. The only person under stress that night was me, Mr. Shaw." Ethan was at a party, eating birthday cake, while his father was fighting for his life. He then spent the next year stealing from my bank accounts every single time I was too sick or absent to notice. These were not poor choices under stress. This was a pattern of calculated, predatory exploitation. "But he's your son. Don't you want to show him some mercy?" "I showed him mercy for 35 years, Mr. Shaw. That mercy is what enabled Ethan to become someone who could abandon his dying father and steal from him systematically. Perhaps, this time, consequences will be more educational than mercy ever was." The next morning, I woke up to discover that Ethan had somehow managed to post on social media from jail. His Facebook status read, "Going through a difficult time right now due to some family misunderstandings. Thank you to everyone who's been reaching out with support. The truth will come out soon." Family misunderstandings. Even while facing multiple federal charges, Ethan still couldn't bring himself to admit the truth of what he had done. Within hours, his post had accumulated dozens of supportive comments from people who knew nothing about the systematic theft, the forged documents, or the night he chose a birthday party over his own father's deathbed. The narrative Ethan was crafting for the public portrayed him as the unfortunate victim of an elderly father's confusion and vindictiveness. But social media posts don't change FBI evidence logs. Public sympathy doesn't alter digital forensics. Ethan could spin his story however he wanted. The facts would speak for themselves in a court of law. Chris Vance called that afternoon with an update on Ethan's bail hearing. "Mr. Hale, the judge set bail at $200,000. Given the systematic nature of the fraud and the significant flight risk assessment, he also ordered electronic monitoring if he somehow makes bail. Will he be able to raise that kind of money? Highly unlikely. He'd need to put up collateral worth at least $200,000, and given his current financial situation, I just don't think that's possible for him." Good. Ethan would remain in custody, unable to interfere with witnesses, unable to access any remaining financial accounts, and unable to commit any additional crimes while he awaited trial. That evening, I received a handwritten letter from Ethan, delivered to me through his attorney. The stationery was cheap jail commissary paper, and his usually perfect handwriting looked shaky and uneven. "Dad, I know you're angry with me, and I understand why. I made mistakes, and I'm truly sorry. But please don't let this destroy our family forever. I love you, and I know you love me, too. Can we please just work this out like adults? Your son, Ethan." I read the letter twice, then filed it away with the rest of the evidence Chris and I had so carefully assembled. Even from a jail cell, Ethan couldn't acknowledge the reality of what he had done. He still characterized 18 months of systematic theft and the abandonment of his dying father as mistakes that could simply be worked out. Some people never learn. They just get better at manipulating the people around them. Ethan was about to discover that federal prosecutors were not as easily manipulated as the father he had been exploiting for years. The federal courthouse smelled of marble, disinfectant, and justice. It was cold, clean, and utterly unforgiving. I sat in the public gallery, wearing my best Navy suit and my grandfather's pearl tie pin. The same pin I had worn to Ethan's graduation, his wedding, and every other important moment of his life. Today would be his most important moment yet. And for the first time, I was not there to support him. Ethan sat at the defendant's table, dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit, his dark hair pulled back in a messy, unkempt style. The designer clothes and perfect grooming were gone, replaced by the stark, humbling reality of federal custody. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the crushing weight of his circumstances. His attorney, Daniel Shaw, whispered urgently in his ear while shuffling through a mountain of papers. Across the aisle, Assistant U.S. Attorney Matthew Cole arranged his evidence with the methodical precision of a man who had never lost a case this strong. Judge Robert Evans entered the courtroom with a commanding presence that made everyone in the room sit up a little straighter. He was a man in his 60s, with a full head of steel gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen every possible version of human greed and stupidity. "This is the case of the United States versus Ethan Hale," Judge Evans announced, his voice booming through the quiet room. "The defendant stands charged with wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, and forgery. How does the defendant plead?" Ethan stood up, his legs visibly shaking. "Not guilty," Your Honor. The trial began with Matthew Cole's opening statement, delivered with the clinical efficiency of a surgeon making the first incision. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about betrayal. The defendant, Ethan Hale, systematically exploited his elderly father's trust to steal over $15,000. When his access to those funds was cut off, he escalated his crimes to wire fraud, using forged legal documents. Matthew walked over to a large chart that detailed the timeline of Ethan's crimes. The evidence will show that Mr. Hale accessed his father's accounts without authorization for 18 months. He deliberately timed these thefts to coincide with his father's illnesses and absences from home. When his father nearly died of a heart attack, Mr. Hale chose to attend a birthday party instead of going to the hospital. And when his father survived and discovered the theft, Mr. Hale attempted to steal even more money, using documents he knew to be fraudulent. I watched the faces of the jury as Matthew spoke. Their expressions ranged from confusion to outright disgust. The idea of stealing from one's own dying father was so fundamentally reprehensible that even the most hardened-looking jurors were visibly disturbed. Daniel Shaw's opening statement was exactly what I had expected, a desperate attempt to reframe criminal behavior as simple family dysfunction. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a tragedy of family miscommunication. Ethan Hale is a loving son who made some poor financial decisions during a very stressful time in his life. He never intended to steal from his father. He was merely helping with financial management and made some unfortunate mistakes in judgment. The first witness to be called was nurse Sarah Jenkins, who testified about the night of my heart attack with devastating precision. I called Mr. Hale to inform him that his father was in critical condition and might not survive the night, Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. Mr. Hale told me that he could not come to the hospital because he was attending his father-in-law's birthday party and couldn't miss it for anything in the world. Did you explain the severity of his father's condition? Matthew asked. Yes. I specifically told him that his father might die that night. I made it absolutely clear that this could be his last opportunity to see his father alive. And how did Mr. Hale respond to that? He said the birthday party was more important and that he would try to visit the next day if his father survived. The jury looked horrified. Several jurors shot venomous glances at Ethan, who was staring down at the table, refusing to meet their eyes. Chris Vance took the stand next, methodically walking the jury through 18 months of digital evidence with the patience of a teacher explaining arithmetic to a group of young children. The defendant accessed his father's online banking accounts 47 times over an 18-month period, Chris testified. These unauthorized accesses were timed to coincide with Mr. Hale's hospitalizations, his out-of-town trips, and periods when he was too ill to monitor his own finances. Can you give the jury a specific example? Matthew asked. During Mr. Hale's 3-day hospital stay for gallbladder surgery, the defendant made 5 unauthorized transfers totaling $2,800. The transfers were made to accounts controlled by the defendant and his wife. And yes, Mr. Hale was unconscious, under general anesthesia when 3 of those transfers were made. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Bank records, digital forensics, witness testimony. Everything pointed to systematic, calculated theft by a son who had cruelly exploited his own father's medical vulnerability. When Ethan took the stand in his own defense, I could see immediately that it was a catastrophic mistake. Mr. Hale, Matthew began his cross-examination, on the night your father had his heart attack, where were you? I was at my father-in-law's birthday party. And did the hospital staff explain to you that your father might not survive the night? Yes. But you chose to stay at the birthday party, instead of going to see your potentially dying father. Is that correct? It wasn't that simple. You had obligations? Yes. Mr. Hale, what obligation could possibly be more important than being with your father during what might have been his last night on Earth? Ethan's face flushed a deep, angry red. You don't understand. I couldn't just leave. You couldn't leave a birthday party to be with your dying father? It would have been rude. The courtroom went completely, deathly silent. Ethan had just admitted, under oath, that being rude to his father-in-law was more important to him than being present for his own father's potential death. Mr. Hale, let's talk about the money you took from your father's accounts. Did you have his permission? I knew he would want to help me if I asked. That's not what I asked, sir. Did you have his permission? Not explicitly. No. So you took his money without asking. I was going to pay it back. When? When were you going to pay back the $15,000 you stole? Ethan couldn't answer because everyone in that room knew the truth. He had never intended to pay back a single cent. The closing arguments were almost anticlimactic. Matthew methodically reviewed the mountain of evidence, while Daniel Shaw made one last, desperate plea for mercy based on Ethan's status as a first-time offender. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of elder financial abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. Ethan collapsed into his chair, sobbing openly and uncontrollably. His perfect, polished composure had finally cracked completely under the weight of consequences he had never, in his wildest dreams, imagined he would have to face. I felt nothing as I watched my son's life come to an end in that courtroom. No satisfaction, no sadness, no regret. Just the quiet, cold certainty that justice had been served. Some fathers would have rushed forward to comfort their convicted son. Some fathers would have promised to appeal, to fight, to never give up. But I wasn't some fathers anymore. I gathered my coat, stood up, and walked out of the courtroom while Ethan was still crying. The son who had abandoned me in my moment of greatest need had just learned what abandonment really meant. 3 months later, I returned to the same federal courthouse for Ethan's sentencing hearing. The marbles still smelled like justice, but this time, I was there to witness the final chapter of my son's criminal career. Ethan had lost a significant amount of weight during his time in custody. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his now gaunt frame, and his once perfect dark hair hung limp and lifeless around his shoulders. Prison had stripped away all the superficial charm that had allowed him to manipulate his way through life. Judge Evans reviewed the pre-sentence report with the methodical thoroughness that had made him one of the most respected federal judges in the district. Mr. Hale, you have been convicted of multiple serious crimes involving the systematic exploitation of your elderly father. The court has reviewed your criminal history, or lack thereof, as well as the impact statements from the victim and the affected financial institutions. He paused, looking directly at Ethan. The court has also reviewed your profound lack of genuine remorse. Throughout this entire process, you have consistently characterized your crimes as mistakes and family misunderstandings. You have never once acknowledged the calculated nature of your actions or taken full responsibility for the harm you have caused. Ethan's attorney stood to address the court. Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender and the father of 2 young children. He has learned from this experience and is committed to making amends with his family. We ask for leniency in sentencing. Judge Evans's expression remained unchanged. Mr. Shaw, your client abandoned his dying father to attend a birthday party, then spent the next 18 months systematically stealing from him during periods of extreme medical vulnerability. When he was confronted with his crimes, he escalated his behavior to wire fraud, using forged legal documents. This pattern of behavior demonstrates a profound moral failing that goes far beyond simple mistakes. The judge then turned his attention to me. "Mr. Hale, would you like to make a victim impact statement?" I stood up slowly. Every eye in the courtroom was focused on me. I had spent weeks preparing this statement, but in the end, the truth was simple. "Your Honor, Ethan is my only child. I raised him, I educated him, and I loved him unconditionally for 35 years. When I nearly died of a heart attack, he made the deliberate choice to stay at a birthday party instead of being with me. That single decision revealed who he truly is, beneath the facade of the son I thought I had raised." I looked directly at Ethan, who was now crying silently at the defendant's table. The financial theft was painful, but the emotional abandonment was devastating. I spent my life teaching Ethan about love, loyalty, and responsibility. He repaid that teaching by exploiting my vulnerability at a time when I was most in need of his protection. I turned back to Judge Evans. "Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I want accountability. Ethan needs to understand that actions have consequences, and that love without boundaries simply becomes enablement. For his sake, and for the sake of society, he needs to face the full weight of justice." Judge Evans nodded gravely. "Mr. Hale, please stand for sentencing." Ethan struggled to his feet, his legs shaking visibly. "On the charge of wire fraud, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison. On the charge of identity theft, 5 years to run concurrently. On the charge of elder financial abuse, 3 years to run concurrently. On the charge of forgery, 2 years to run concurrently." Ethan's knees buckled, and his attorney had to steady him. "Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution in the amount of $18,347 to cover the stolen funds, plus interest in all investigative costs. You will serve 3 years of supervised probation following your release, during which time you are prohibited from accessing any financial accounts belonging to family members without their express written permission." 8 years in federal prison. My son would be 43 years old when he was finally released. His children would be nearly adults, and his life would be permanently marked by multiple felony convictions. "Furthermore," Judge Evans continued, his voice like stone, "you are permanently enjoined from contacting the victim, Arthur Hale, through any means whatsoever. Any attempt to contact him, either directly or through third parties, will result in additional criminal charges." Ethan looked across the courtroom at me one last time. His face was streaked with tears, his mouth moving, as if he wanted to say something. But what was there left to say? That he was sorry? That he had finally learned his lesson? That he wanted his father's forgiveness? I had heard all of those promises before, usually when Ethan wanted something from me. This time, I didn't need to hear them. The court had spoken, and justice had been served. As they led Ethan away in shackles, I gathered my coat and walked toward the courthouse exit. In the hallway, I was approached by a young woman with a notebook, a reporter from the local newspaper. "Mr. Hale, how do you feel about your son's sentence?" I paused, considering my words carefully. "I feel that justice has been served. Actions have consequences, and today, those consequences were imposed fairly and appropriately. Do you have any regrets about prosecuting your own son?" "My only regret is that I didn't recognize the pattern of exploitation sooner. Perhaps an earlier intervention could have prevented Ethan from escalating his behavior to federal crimes. Will you ever forgive him?" I thought about that question as I walked to my car. Forgiveness was a complicated thing. I could forgive Ethan for being selfish, immature, and financially irresponsible. I could even perhaps forgive him for choosing a birthday party over my deathbed. But I could not forgive the systematic, calculated exploitation that had followed. I could not forgive 18 months of stealing from his sick, vulnerable father. I could not forgive the wire fraud attempt that had demonstrated his complete lack of remorse or any intention to change. Forgiveness and accountability are not mutually exclusive, I told the reporter. Ethan will have 8 years to consider whether or not he wants to become someone worthy of forgiveness. 2 years have passed since Ethan's sentencing, and my life has never been more peaceful. I wake up each morning in my own home, secure in the knowledge that my bank accounts are safe, my medical decisions are my own, and my financial future is completely protected from exploitation. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, without the constant, oppressive undercurrent of manipulation and hidden agendas. I have since redecorated Ethan's old bedroom, transforming it from a shrine to a father's devotion into a practical and welcoming guest room for the friends who actually deserve my hospitality. I now volunteer at the local literacy center 3 days a week, teaching adult learners how to read financial documents and recognize the signs of predatory lending practices. There is something deeply satisfying about helping other people protect themselves from the kind of exploitation I once endured. My garden has flourished without the constant drain of Ethan's periodic raids on my time and energy. The roses bloom more abundantly, and the vegetable garden produces enough for me to share with my neighbors. I've even added a small greenhouse, where I start seedlings for the community garden project down the street. Tom Sullivan calls me periodically to update me on the legal protections we put in place. The trust documents remain ironclad, the no contest clause is unchallenged, and my estate planning now reflects my current values, rather than my former illusions about family loyalty. Arthur, Tom said during our last meeting, I have to tell you, I've never seen someone handle a family betrayal with such surgical precision. You protected yourself completely, while staying strictly within all legal boundaries. Thomas, that precision was necessary. Emotion would have created vulnerabilities that Ethan could have exploited, even from prison. Chris Vance sends me quarterly reports, showing that all of my financial accounts remain secure and properly monitored. The protection systems we implemented continued to function perfectly, alerting me to any unusual activity and maintaining the digital security that keeps opportunists at bay. Mr. Hale, Chris told me recently, your case has become a template for our other clients who are dealing with family financial abuse. The methodical documentation and legal preparation you insisted on created an airtight prosecution that sent a clear message to other potential exploiters. I receive periodic updates about Ethan through the federal prison system's victim notification program. He's housed in a minimum security facility in another state, participating in financial responsibility classes and working in the prison library. His earliest possible release date is still 5 years away. Jessica has since filed for divorce, citing the impossible financial burden of Ethan's restitution payments and the social stigma of being married to a convicted felon. The children now live with her brother, their college funds completely depleted by legal costs and the shame of their father's crimes. Sometimes, I wonder if Ethan ever thinks about the night he chose a birthday party over his dying father. Does he remember the casual cruelty in his voice when he told the nurse that a party was more important than his father's life? Does he understand that that single decision revealed who he truly was beneath 35 years of carefully constructed performance? I've been contacted by other elderly parents who are dealing with similar situations of exploitation by their adult children. Word has spread through the local senior communities about the man who successfully prosecuted his own son for elder abuse. They want advice, legal referrals, and the courage to stop enabling criminal behavior disguised as family loyalty. "How did you find the strength to do it?" they all ask. "How did you prosecute your own child?" The answer is always the same. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Love does not require you to enable criminal behavior. My new will reflects my current reality, not my past hopes. The bulk of my estate will now go to fund scholarships for older men returning to education, domestic violence shelters, and programs that help seniors recognize and report financial abuse. The remaining assets will support the friends and charities that have earned my respect through their actions, not their expectations. Last month, I received a letter, forwarded to me through Ethan's prison counselor. The envelope was addressed in Ethan's handwriting, which now looked shakier and less confident. After 2 years of federal incarceration, he had finally reached out. I threw it away, unopened. Whatever Ethan wanted to say, apologies, explanations, requests for reconciliation, it no longer mattered to me. The time for words had passed the night he chose a birthday party over his father's deathbed. Everything since then has been about documentation and consequences. Some stories end with forgiveness and reconciliation. Some stories end with families reunited and lessons learned. This story ends with an elderly man sitting in his garden on a warm summer evening, reading a book about ancient Roman history and feeling perfectly content with his solitude. It ends with bank accounts that are secure, medical decisions that are his own, and a future that belongs entirely to him. It ends with justice served and peace reclaimed. The phone rings occasionally, with calls from well-meaning friends who think I should reach out to Ethan, who suggest that family is family and that I should consider forgiveness. I thank them for their concern and politely change the subject. They don't understand that forgiveness isn't always a healing act. Sometimes it's just another word for enabling. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a criminal is to let them serve their sentence completely, without interference from the very love that originally enabled their crimes. Ethan had 35 years to earn my trust, my respect, and my devotion. He chose to exploit all three. Now, he has 8 years to consider whether he wants to become someone worthy of redemption. I sincerely hope he uses that time wisely, but his redemption is no longer my responsibility. I water my roses and plan my evening meal, a man finally free from the exhausting burden of loving someone more than they ever loved me. The sun sets over my garden with the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived and a future well protected. Some fathers never learn to let go. Some fathers enable criminal behavior until it destroys both the criminal and the victim. But I learned eventually that the greatest love is sometimes the refusal to rescue someone from the consequences of their own choices. Ethan wanted my money more than he wanted my life. Now he has neither, and I have both my money and my life. Finally my own, after years of sharing them with someone who valued only one of the two. The garden needs watering, the book needs finishing, and tomorrow I'm teaching 3 new students how to read financial statements so they can protect themselves from the kind of exploitation I once endured. It's a good life, made all the better by the absence of people who confused love with access to bank accounts. Some stories end with reconciliation. This one ends with reclamation. The difference, I've learned, is that reconciliation requires both people to change. Reclamation only requires one person to be strong enough to stop giving away what they can no longer afford to lose. It was the best choice I ever made. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.